we interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage, the Cowardly Dog. Abandoned as a pup, he was found by Muriel, who lives in the middle of nowhere with her husband, Eustace Bay. But creepy stuff happens in nowhere. It's up to Courage to save his new home.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
The late 90s, early 2000s were an emblematic era for Cartoon Network. I want to tell you guys about the most iconic cartoon in my opinion, a show that brought memorable, haunting moments like this one.
Return the slab.
What?
Return the slab, or suffer my curse.
And this.
Dogs are evil.
And this.
You're not perfect.
And let's not forget about this one.
I just know something bad is going to happen. Huh?
This show impacted me profoundly growing up, and if you clicked on this video, I am sure you too were terrified and mesmerized at the same time by its iconic art style, realistic and tragic villains, and of course, its heartwarming moments. Courage, the Cowardly Dog was created by John R. Dilworth and ran for 6 years, from 1996 to 2002. Dilworth gave us 4 perfectly horrifying seasons full of creepy adventures, compelling plot lines, and beautiful, beautiful scenes. As this year marks the 20th anniversary of Courage's grand finale, let's look back at what made this show so special and how children horror is done right. Courage's pilot episode was called The Chicken from Outer Space, and even Dilworth was surprised by its success, and the request of the studio to turn it into a full series, describing the whole ordeal as: "The whole business from indie short to Oscar-nom to TV series was an unexpected and dramatic event, like an asteroid crashing through the kitchen ceiling while eating your morning muffin." The idea of making Courage came from Dilworth's awareness of a need to make something that reflected a more simple lifestyle, meeting the horrors of modern progress. He was keen on the family farm myth and the atomic age madness. Personal life ingredients also played a huge part in the mixing in, of course. His love of dogs, sci-fi, and horror. He famously said in one interview that the show, like any great art, should be left to interpretation. I personally find it incredibly charming and reassuring when the creators or authors of a book or show or painting reinforce the notion that art should be made personal to the viewer or audience. It's up to us to allocate meaning to what we see to a certain extent. Thus, we become part of the creative process. As the art style of Courage is heavily reminiscent of Dali, we can't help but wonder at the weird and fascinating mix of media that creates the world in which Muriel and Eustace live. We see Nowhere as this isolated place full of mysteries and touched by the supernatural, where reality is distorted and put into question with every single episode, making us wonder if anything that we see is even real. Nowhere can also be seen as the void between our world and the next, according to some fan theories, which I honestly love. The setting of the farm is heavily reminiscent of that of a liminal space, which the French talk of how the psychoanalytic setting opens, forges the intermediate space, excluded middle, or between, that figures so importantly in Irigaray's writing. Marion Milner claimed that a temporal spatial frame also makes of the special kind of reality of a psychoanalytic session, the different kind of reality that is within it. Thus, a liminal space is a space of transition, of change, an almost ritualic passage that a person crosses into the next stage. They often induce a deep sense of eeriness and are deeply unsettling at times. Think of an abandoned train station, an empty hotel, or a school at night. That is nowhere. Asymmetry and vivid colors bring the world to life in a compelling and fantasy-like way, mirroring the works of Dali. I must get boring for a second, just bear with me. It's important in understanding what makes courage so special and memorable. Surrealism is often characterized by positivism of expression, a fight against the rigid ideals of realism, ideals which the surrealist artist believed culminated in the horrors of World War I. According to the major spokesman of the movement, the poet and critic André Breton, who published the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924, Surrealism was a means of reuniting conscious and unconscious realms of experience so completely that the world of dream and fantasy would be joined to the everyday, rational world in an absolute reality, a surreality, drawing heavily on theories adapted from Sigmund Freud. Breton saw the unconscious as the wellspring of the imagination. He defined genius in terms of accessibility to this normally untapped realm, which, he believed, could be attained by poets and painters alike. We can clearly see in the show the experimentation with media, the mix of different animation styles that make us question reality. In one of my favorite episodes, A Night of the Museum, Muriel, Eustace and Courage are completely immersed into the artworks, exchanging places with the thinker and Mona Lisa herself. I find this episode extremely telling, as it implies to us that art and reality aren't so easily opposed to each other. One can effortlessly jump from one painting to the other or experience life through the lenses of the art which one consumes or is exposed to. At the end of the episode, Courage and Muriel don't just leave the museum and go back to the US as they came. No. They literally transport themselves through Grant Wood's 1930 American Goth, thus enforcing that Courage, the show, is in fact an artwork that deserves to be treated as such. Muriel's, Eustace's, and Courage's world is a place where supernatural and grotesque events happen, where reality is often distorted and anything can and does happen, much like in a Dali painting. What makes the show so emblematic can arguably also be the use of colors to convey meaning and reinforce some main motivations of the villains Courage faces. The colors used in depicting the antagonists tell us a lot about their character, such as in the first episode, The Cat's Motel. The cat is devilishly looking with malicious intent, reminding me a bit of him from Powerpuff Girls. In other places, where we see a heavy usage of reds and oranges in the show, we immediately feel uneasy and in danger, those intense colors revoking images from hell. Just look at the Windmill Vandals episode. Every single shot is covered in blood-red hues, the haunting music giving you chills when the vengeful vandals appear out of thin air each time the windmill stops working. We see these imageries of hellish, scary monsters over and over again throughout the course of the show. Be the supernatural occurrence that drives Courage to fight a cursed gang of ghosts seeking vengeance and bloodshed, a misunderstood River Nessie whose only wish is to have someone appreciate her singing, or a charming young girl playing violin in her room. Red is used in the show to signal to the viewer that this is the realm of the unfriendly guys, unfriendly beings with malicious intent, ready to snatch his precious Muriel anytime. My personal favorites are violence and blues, though. In the history of literature and cinematography, violet has been used to evoke the eerie side of the supernatural, the most composed and awe-inducing cousin of red. Violets and blues are rarely found in nature, especially in living beings. Thus, we have a very interesting juxtaposition in Courage of blues and violets each time an eerie and melancholic subject is approached. Let's take the episode Sandman Sleeps, where we have the villain of the episode residing in his fairy castle in a place which can only be described as the realm of dreams. Like in any fairy tale, we have a huge magical forest where even the trees are purple, and our hero needs to traverse the border between dreams and reality. Because, hey, in case you haven't noticed, there are no trees growing in nowhere. Where else would this forest be? The antagonists of Courage, whose predominantly colors are blues and violets, are driven mostly by depression, like in the case of Dr. Zalost and the Shadow Monster, or oftentimes they are downright caught in the wickedness of man, without any fault of their own. Remember the heartbreaking The Last of the Star Makers, or The Wishing Tree? Sci-Fi.com write in an interview with Dilworth. Just as he was upending our expectations of canines by making his main character an anxious dog, Dilworth was also subverting the audience's perception of bad guys. Last of the Star Makers proved that a cephalopod from outer space doesn't always have to be a madness-inducing terror from beyond the veil of human comprehension. The Tower of Dr. Zalost was also a great case study in human depression, and The Mask explored heavy topics such as domestic violence. Many of the antagonists we see in the show have two predominant colors, red and green. Now that we've tackled the symbolism of the red, let's discuss the sickly phosphorescent green that made my skin crawl as a child. Although green is the color of nature, it can be associated with rebirth. In the horror genre, it often represents illness and greed, and Courage experiences his fair share of sickly villains throughout the show. We often see Courage's villains in shades of oversaturated greens, inducing a discomforting feeling, almost nauseous. By using those tones, Dilworth created an unpleasant, often disturbing scenery and landscape. Besides illness and unease, the green acts as a means for the viewer to associate that character to greed and envy. Schwick, Mundo, and of course Eustace fall heavily in this category. Arguably, the most important and tragic of Courage's villains is the very husband of his human mom, Muriel. Eustace is greedy, envious, and struggles to cope with his own unsolved trauma, but he's also the main abuser in Courage's life, one that he cannot escape from. Courage is time and time again forced to cope with domestic violence, being helpless in fighting this ultimate enemy. In the interview, Dilworth says about his villains, "I don't portray psychopaths. That's a different monster altogether, and those don't interest me," the creator explained. "We are talking about the villain, and I'm very much interested in the repressed traumas of villains, even of protagonists. I have stitched together a vague history of Eustace, that he was unloved by his mother. She preferred an older brother, and there was the effect of that in Eustace. I've explored that in a few cartoons. So the idea of going deeper, trying to assign an etymology of bad behavior to childhood trauma, is based on actual science. That's the science of psychiatry." Courage, for the most part, is able to rationalize with the antagonist that at the beginning seemed to have malicious intentions toward Muriel. As an abandoned pup with separation anxiety disorder, he's ever on guard, trying to fight any danger that might harm Muriel along the way. Although Eustace serves as one of the biggest challenges that Courage needs to adapt to, as this villain can't simply be defeated, we are given multiple occasions to feel bad for this horrible farmer who's been unloved his whole life by his own mother and bullied by his overachiever brother.
This once? Of course you can't, because you're not man enough to handle Big Bob. See you later, useless. I ain't useless. I'm Eustace.
In the Mask episode, a fan favorite, and rightfully so, we have an extremely complex theme: domestic violence, prejudice, and overcoming discrimination against that of lesbian love in a patriarchal society. In this episode, Kitty develops strong discriminatory views on all dogs due to Bunny's abuse from Mad Dog. Our biases and past experiences shape us in negative ways if they are left unchecked and unaddressed. Kitty's coping mechanisms after suffering some traumatic experiences lead to her becoming an abuser herself. She uses the mask to hide from the real world and put on a protective facade, while Bunny is still emotionally manipulated and physically abused by her boyfriend and his gang. Eustace always uses a mask to scare Courage. He is thus hiding his own shame, the repressed feelings towards himself, being unable to cope in a healthy way with the unloved childhood he received from his own mother. The theme of negligence and ignorance from family and friends, while the abused is being trapped in such dark places, we can also spot in Freaky Fred episode. What makes this character so bloody terrifying is the trust he receives from Muriel. None of the family members take Courage's discomfort seriously, and his warnings are being constantly ignored. As most abuses happen in close circles, be it family or friends, that makes Fred an especially disgusting villain. And also, the way he talks, the way he emphasizes the word naughty, and his perverse eyes on Courage is enough to make your skin crawl. Throughout the show, we've seen monsters being misunderstood, our own prejudices put into question as Courage befriends them, tries to understand their backstories and perspectives, and ultimately the biggest lesson learned from this incredible show is that feeling afraid is normal. Fear can be a catalyst to take action and overcome challenges, however terrifying they seem to be. The theme of fear appears in the foreplan in the computer episode, where we see the critique of bravery, how being brave doesn't equal better or more heroic. Bravery and fear are two sides of the same coin, and this is a wonderful lesson I've learned as a child from Courage. Despite all hardships and struggles, we can overcome our fears and be brave in facing the absurdities that life throws at us each day. From Courage, we learn how to deal with our own monsters. Unlike in most cartoons, Courage never attacks his villains without good reason. He tries to understand them, rationalize with them, make peace with them, and sometimes even friends. While the villains try to bring Courage to the dark side, they also reflect what Courage could become if he would lack actual courage. One of the reasons why they are so terrifying is because they show us a prospect for the future if we go with our own traumas unchecked in life. Hey guys, thank you so much for sticking until the end. Please like and subscribe this video if you enjoyed it, and of course don't forget to leave your thoughts and opinions about Courage and the ways it impacted you as a child in the comments below. Or if you didn't get to watch the show, would you?